Welcome, everyone, to Womanocity for women with curiosity, like you and me and all the wonderful listeners around the world. We're here on Woman Radio, and today in my studio, I have a wonderful guest, Gaellen Quinn. Her father was a pilot, and they grew up traveling the world, and she was intrigued by so many cultures, both old and new. She encountered so many different people, so diversity was very much a part of her life. When she grew up, she and her two daughters, who were middle school age children, decided to go for 3 years as volunteers to serve at an orphanage and a school for street kids in the Brazilian Amazon. Yeah, you heard that right, Amazon. When I think about that, it's like I would be terrified to go there. However, she worked there for 3 years, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. When she returned to the US, she was a maven in advertising, newsletter publishing, and marketing. She calls herself a serial entrepreneur. Something happened in her life in 2001 that really changed its course. She happened to be in New York City, in Manhattan, on 9/11, only blocks from the World Trade Center when it was destroyed by 2 terrorist airplanes. On the street, she could see people running, covered in ash, frightened, shocked, confused, and terrified in the chaos. That experience of such tragic proportions caused her to decide how she really wanted to spend her life. And she decided that she wanted to pursue a master's degree in social and economic development in order to be of greater service in our very needy world. For over a decade, Gaellen worked for a social and economic development foundation that did great work for the status of women and girls around the world in countries like Mongolia, Brazil, Haiti, India, China, Panama, Cameroon, the Gambia, Colombia, Uganda, and Vietnam, international and community development, and then became an award-winning novelist. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Her novel, The Last Aloha. It won so many awards, including the Bay Area Independent Publishers Association Award for Best Historical Fiction, the Hawaii Publishers Association Award for Excellence. She was a finalist for Forward Review's Award for Book of the Year, the Texas Writers Association, and awards from NPR Radio. Not only did this book correct history, it reflected her passion for the peoples whom she loved in a place where she would end up spending the rest of her life with her husband on a rural island of Molokai in Hawaii. Molokai is so beautiful and very special. It's primarily indigenous Native Hawaiian population. It's small, and Gaellen is known all over the island because she volunteers in various capacities to assist community building on Molokai, especially educational programs for children and youth and activities that preserve and promote Native culture. I'm so happy to have Gaellen Quinn in my studio today. Gaellen Quinn, author, adventurer, Renaissance woman, lady who can't be stopped. Shall I go on? You are so amazing, and I'm so happy to have you with me. Welcome, welcome, Gaellen. And as we say in Hawaii, aloha mai for coming into my studio today and being a perfect guest, especially for this month, which is Hawaiian History Month.
Thank you for having me, Tadia. It's really great to be here. And especially it's great to know that this show goes out all over the world, because I think people will be quite taken with our subject tonight, which is the last queen of Hawaii. So here's a woman who was of a stature that really deserves a lot of attention. And I hope by the end of this show, people will understand exactly why.
Thank you. I agree with you. Queen Lili is such an amazing individual. Tell me, when did your interest in the subject of the Queen of Hawaiian history and what happened with how Hawaii became part of America, when and how did that start? What triggered your interest?
Well, it was many years ago that my brother married a Hawaiian woman. And I had been traveling to Hawaii since I was just a kid. As you mentioned earlier, my dad was a pilot. So, we came as tourists often. And I knew that Hawaii had the only royal palace on American soil. I knew that it had a King Street and a Queen Street, but I never put two and two together to understand that it had been an independent nation before it became part of the United States. And when I started to get to know my new sister-in-law, who's Hawaiian, she started telling me stories about Hawaii that in all my travels to Hawaii, I had never heard. Basically, the Hawaiian side of the story. And that really piqued my interest because it made me understand how islands 2,000 miles from the United States in the middle of the Pacific Ocean could eventually become a state of the United States.
Yes, it is very peculiar. Most people don't know this history. The tourists who come here don't know the history. And so they really don't appreciate culture. The streets of all the islands are named after Hawaiian royalty, most all of them. There's so many deep stories behind each one of those names, but we're going to focus on the Queen because she is absolutely the subject of your novel. And she is also what I would call the exemplar of how Hawaiians have demonstrated what aloha really means, because it's not just a word that says hello or how are you or I love you, which is kind of the tourist version. It really has far, far deeper meaning that really has changed my life when I studied and learned what real aloha was. Tell me a little about the Queen. How did her life become what it did?
Yes, well, she was born into a chiefly family in 1838. It was much later her brother became king, King Kalakaua. And he was put upon really by missionary descendants that were living in the islands who were no longer missionaries. They had become business people and they were looking for material prosperity and pushing him constantly to do whatever they wanted. It caused him a great deal of stress and he eventually passed away. Then Lili uokalani, his sister, ascended the throne in 1891. And she entered into the ruling of Hawaii at a time that was extremely difficult because of all these pressures from American-related businessmen whose families had come to Hawaii a couple generations before, and many other difficulties that were happening in the Hawaiian Islands at that time.
I know that the original missionaries to Hawaii, who came with very good intentions of bringing a Christian message to a people who had not heard the Christian message before, and they actually helped take the Hawaiian language into a written form. They came, they taught, and they returned to the East Coast of the United States. However, those that stayed and had children here, those children, one or two generations later, became greedy. They lost the message of missionarying, and they saw that the things that grew here, like pineapple and sugar and fruits and incredible agriculture, could make them money. Then the Spanish-American War started, and that really accelerated their idea to become a military position in the Pacific for the United States. And then poor King Kalakaua, he had gone all over the world and met royalty and was welcomed by other governments all around the world. He's the only royal person who ever circumnavigated the earth. And so Hawaii was seen as a nation. It was beloved by the United Kingdom. Queen Victoria protected the islands. And that's why some people wonder, why do we have, tell me a little bit about what the Queen accomplished before she was imprisoned in her own palace.
She was an amazing woman and way ahead of her time. She actually established a women's bank so that women could get small loans to start businesses. She was a huge advocate of education for girls and made sure that those opportunities were open to girls, and actually supported a lot of girls in their education by providing scholarships with her own funds. She was very much aware of health issues. There was a problem with smallpox coming into the islands, and she quarantined all of Honolulu against the wishes of the business community, and was just adamant that these health concerns should be followed, and she prevailed. So she protected the people that way. She also established a trust later in her life with the funds that she had left, which exists to the present day and still supports children who are poor or needy, or families that are needy. And this was something that all of the Royal Hawaiians did with their wealth. They supported the building of a hospital. They supported homes for the aged. They supported various kinds of social programs so that their people would survive, because they were being embattled on so many fronts.
Indeed, the Queen is beloved today.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that really struck me was that Hawaiians are still advocating and working for their own sovereignty. The Hawaiian kingdom was overthrown illegally, and since that time, and during that time, they were very much active in trying to prevent it. And even now in modern times, there's a lot of activism around regaining sovereignty and regaining the rights of the Hawaiian people. I have friends in that movement for sovereignty who have told me that one of the reasons that that movement has never become violent is because the Queen would have frowned on it. And it was because she embodied these incredible, what we used to call virtues, but are now more like spiritual attributes that allowed her to really transcend the battle. She was extraordinarily very adept. She could answer questions like a lawyer. She knew what the international law was. She fought this takeover on every front legally. And the only reason that the opponents prevailed was because they did underhanded things and illegal things, illegally landed Marines to confront her across from the palace and so forth. She was on every front really rising above the underhanded things that they did. And for a long time, she prevailed. She was actually winning the fight. And then, like you mentioned earlier, that the Spanish-American War came along, and America thought that they should have a base in the Pacific to fight the Spanish in the Philippines. And that's when they moved, again, illegally, to quote unquote annex the islands. And that's what they did. But she had these tremendous qualities of integrity, of a brilliant mind, of an ability to make people feel loved. And she really saw her community as one community. She didn't throw these people out when they opposed her. You know, that wasn't her intention. Her intention was that people of all backgrounds and ethnic groups and language groups that should be able to live together in one community. She ultimately struggled, I think, heartily to forgive personally the wrongs that had been done to her, but to also encourage her people to never never give up in fighting for what is right. In fact, all of the Royal Hawaiians had personal mottos, and Queen Lili Uokalani's personal motto was Onipa'a, which means be steadfast. But it was a little bit larger than that, and you'll hear that in one of her songs, Onipa'a ma kapono, be steadfast in doing what is right. Like Nelson Mandela and others of that stature, this is something that they've always put forward as the way that can ultimately prevail. I think Queen Liliuokalani understood that not everything that is good can be accomplished in one lifetime. And yet she saw that if she could encourage her people to be steadfast in doing what is right, that over time, governments change, the eons roll around, and that there would come a time when justice would be done. Like Martin Luther King also said, that the universe tends in the long run to justice. And she felt that way too. And so personally, she could forgive the wrongs that were done to her, but also she transcended in such a way that she was able to encourage her people who hold her in their hearts to this day as their queen to continue on, and they are continuing on to fight for the justice they so deserve.
Absolutely. And those of us who are Kama'aina, not Hawaiian by blood, many of us support that movement because we know the history and we understand the illegality of the occupation of the United States that continues to this day, and it's just wrong. So this is September, and it is Hawaiian History Month because this is the month of the Queen's birthday. On September 2nd, she would have been 183 years old. Because of her, Iolani Palace, which stands as the only, like you said, the only palace that exists in America, has every day wonderful celebrations going on and activities, dance, music, plays, tours. The palace itself is a work of wonder. Actually, it had electricity and telephones before the United States ever did. So people who really learn the true history of Hawaii begin to appreciate how advanced this society was. There was, I think, about 40 newspapers at one point, all in Olelo, the Hawaiian language, and people read. Everyone was literate, everyone was educated. And of course, today, that is not the perception of Indigenous Hawaiians, and it's sad. The Queen was beloved for many reasons that you stated, but also the one thing, she saved her people. And what did she do, Gaellen, to save her people?
It was not known in Washington, D.C., that the Marines were being landed. It was not authorized by the United States. It was the American minister in Honolulu who decided, he was an annexationist and he wanted to get Hawaii for the United States. He decided that he would conspire with this little group of people that were trying to overthrow the monarchy and allow the Marines to be landed to threaten the Queen. The Queen, being very legally and politically astute, she understood very well that if she sent a force against this US force and they prevailed, they conquered, immediately Hawaii, according to international law, would be a conquered territory, and therefore they could be, quote unquote, the spoils of war. They could become part of the United States that way. So she didn't do that. She didn't send a force against these people. And in fact, Hawaii, being very peaceful, did not have a big military force. They basically had police and some military guards. She had met President Cleveland in Washington, D.C. when she was on her way to Queen Victoria's Jubilee in London. She considered President Cleveland a friend. And I think he also in turn reciprocated. So she firmly believed that when he heard about what had happened in Honolulu with the Marines being landed years later, he would restore her to the throne. So when she contacted the people who had sent the Marines, the group that was trying to take over the monarchy. She did not surrender to them. She surrendered to the United States of America. So it was very politically astute, because then it was the United States now that had the responsibility to undo the wrong. And like I said, she was prevailing. She was able to lobby Congress for a number of years after this coup took over to not annex Hawaii, and was very successful in doing that. And if the Spanish-American War had not come along so that the US Congress decided they wanted a base in the Pacific, she probably would have been restored to the throne.
But instead, she was imprisoned in her own bedroom, in her own palace. And my goodness, the testament to that and the legacy of that still exists. And we'll talk about that when we come back. We will talk about the beautiful quilt in her bedroom and what it looks like. We will talk about her music, because what we haven't said yet is that she was a musical genius. There's so much to be said about Queen Lili uokalani, a great woman, a great individual, a great leader. We'll talk about her leadership qualities as soon as we come back with novelist Gaellen Quinn on the island of Molokai in my studio today on Womanocity on Woman Radio. Don't go away.
When I want thought-provoking programs to listen to, I pull up Woman Radio. I especially appreciate the fascinating women who are interviewed on Womanocity, and Tadia gives one food for thought. My name is Kwezi Fudu Tsanenda, and I live in Johannesburg. And Woman Radio is a lively and lovely way to spend my time.
Ich bin Leila Tavanaro Hedarian aus Wien und höre Woman Radio. Ich lerne so viel Interessantes von den Radiomoderatorinnen und liebe die Musik. Ich freue mich, dass ihr auch Woman Radio hört.
Aloha, I'm Maya Sutoro from Honolulu, Hawaii, and you are listening to Woman Radio. I'm listening to...
Welcome back, everyone, to Womanocity for Women with Curiosity. My guest today is the remarkable Gaellen Quinn, who lives on the island of Molokai, the most Hawaiian of Hawaii's islands. Now, we talked before the break about the queen being imprisoned in her own room in the palace. The queen was imprisoned or made to stay, forced into a second-floor room of her palace. Of course, this was done by that very small group of American men who wanted to control Hawaii and illegally took away her power. But despite that, she lived up to her motto that Gaellen shared earlier, Onipa'a, steadfast or determined. She was indeed determined to protect her people, to share their story. So she thought of a way to do this. She and two friends started making a quilt while she was imprisoned. Why did the queen create a quilt, and what did she put on it? That's the most interesting part. She sewed her memories into her quilt. She sewed memories of happy times and of sad times. In the center of the quilt are four important squares, and they share the most important events of her life. One square is of her full name, Lydia Kamakaeahe Liliuokalani, her birth date, when she ascended to the throne. Another square had the date she was dethroned and a date of the uprising. Another square said Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani imprisoned at Iolani Palace, and she put that date. And then the fourth square talks about Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani abdicated the throne on the 24th of January, 1895. So those are the four pivotal squares in the center. And around them were her memories of times good and bad. And I really encourage everyone to look it up on the internet. It's called the Lili uokalani quilt, Liliuokalani. It's colorful, it's beautiful. It sits on that bed in that same bedroom in which she was imprisoned in Iolani Palace, where royal Hawaiians led their nation. Gaellen, we have both seen that quilt. It brings tears to your eyes when you walk into that room. Can you tell how you felt when you first walked in?
I can tell you, my knees started to shake and I would tear up because I knew what had happened in every single room and all the treachery and all of the struggles that had happened there. It was very emotional because the quilt is displayed. It's a very sparse room, just her bed, some note paper where she would write her music. And she was not allowed really to leave. She had to exercise walking up and down the veranda just outside. And she was guarded day and night. Her friends would bring her flowers or bring her something like that. And they would actually wrap these flowers up in newsprint so that she could read the news of the day and try to figure out what was going on in the kingdom. And they wouldn't even allow her to send her music out of the room because they thought that she was putting secret messages in her music to try to get messages to her followers. So it was very, very constrained and difficult for her. And she passed her time, like you said, making the quilt by writing her songs. And also she did a lot of meditating and praying, I think trying to reconcile herself to the dastardly deeds that were done against her and then how she would go forward through all that.
She was a deeply convicted Christian woman who really turned to her faith all her life. And it showed. While she was in that room alone, often with no one to talk to, somehow she felt guided by spiritual voices and hands that helped her transcribe music, songs upon songs upon songs. Beautiful. And she was this great musician. People didn't always know that about her. They knew her as the queen, a great leader, a politically adept woman. But her music. So now let's talk about the magnificent music of Queen Lili uokalani, especially what she wrote at Iolani Palace during the time she was imprisoned by the provisional government of Hawaii, who took control of the palace. It was her home. But of course, she was in her bedroom where she made that quilt and where she wrote magnificent music. The Queen's music is regarded all around the world as exceptional, beautiful, and quite special because it displays the beautiful traditional culture of Hawaii while weaving in hints of Western influences. We're going to listen to her most famous song in a minute because it's a common cultural symbol for Hawaii. But tell us a little about her music as you learned.
She was an extraordinary musician. In fact, she had a sister and two brothers, King Kalakaua, and then a brother and sister besides them. And they were all fantastic musicians, and they used to like to play together and sing together. But individually, she wrote hundreds of songs, and she wrote all kinds of songs about the landscape of Hawaii, about relationships, love songs, and other kinds of songs too that you'll hear about in a minute. I think the one that you're speaking of now, Aloha Oi, is so famous. It was famous in her lifetime, and it's been recorded literally hundreds of times. It was the last song that Johnny Cash recorded before he died, and he put it on his last album. And it was just well regarded by musicians all over the world. And it talks about a very sweet love and having to say goodbye to that love. And so I think that it was something that exemplified her sentiment when she had to relinquish the throne, knowing that her people would suffer enormously because of that. And they have been marginalized and culturally oppressed, and yet they still are resilient and capable and do amazing things all the time. So that song really speaks to them as well, I believe.
It's very interesting because even Bing Crosby and Elvis Presley also recorded it, and many, many, many other people. And it has been in so many soundtracks. If anybody saw Lilo and Stitch, it was in that too. It's just a beautiful, beautiful song. Can you tell us what it means?
Well, my understanding of the song is that it was written many years before when she was in the mountains and with her sister riding, and she saw her sister saying goodbye to someone that she loved. It was just something that occurred to her in that moment and stuck with her, that poignant moment of having to say goodbye to someone that you love. So she later wrote it down in the song. It touches people all over the world and has for over 100 years.
It's a very tender farewell, and she wrote it by hand in 1878. Can you tell us what it's saying?
Aloha Oe is basically a song of farewell to a loved one. It talks about one fond embrace until we meet again, and the sweet memories that are coming back to this person who's singing the song of remembrances past, and that it compares the love to the beauty of the mountains of Hawaii, the sweet roses in the mountains of Hawaii, and the birds that live there, because the birds would sip honey from the flowers. And so it's talking about the honey of your sweet lips. It's very, very tender and has that feeling of nostalgia and longing.
Let's take a listen.
Tadia, one thing that we really haven't touched on that I think is important is the perception of people about Hawaii who have never visited here, the historical perception of people and also the present day perception of people. Many people think that the Hawaiians were living in grass huts when the missionaries first arrived, and they were like that way all the way to statehood, period. But nothing could be further from the truth. And as you can tell from the bit that we've talked about with the Royal Hawaiians, you know, they were world travelers, they were statesmen, they were musicians, artists, writers, composers. They were very cultured people. And the people of Hawaii were very literate. Like you mentioned, they were reading and writing when they didn't even have a written language, just a dozen or so years after the missionaries first arrived. They were fascinated with the ability to read and write and took it up. Anything that came to Hawaii that they felt was useful, they embraced it. It wasn't a not invented here syndrome, you know, with them. With them, they're going, oh, this is lovely. Let's see how we can use it. And they would make it their own. For instance, the musical instruments that came from Europe, the stringed instruments, they took them and made them their own with ukulele, and the beautiful songs that came from that, as you heard, just played. And so what happened during the time of the overthrow was there was a campaign against the Queen and the Royal Hawaiians to make them look inept, to make them look barbaric, to make them look like they had no ability, that they were not capable of ruling. And this was a prejudice of the people who were trying to overthrow them. They were racially prejudiced, the white men of their time, that was of their time. They were religiously prejudiced because their grandparents came as missionaries. They felt that they knew better than other people what spiritual truth was about and what was a true religion. They were prejudiced against women, again, because they were men of their time. And so when the Queen came to power, here you had a woman of color who was extraordinarily capable and who was used to being in charge. And they couldn't order her around like their wives, like they did their wives at home. And so they had this whole campaign in the Hawaiian press and in the US press, where they made her to look like a barbarian, that she was someone who was like a witch doctor or somebody who had no capability, who was someone who was just a colored woman who was of no account and should never have been meant to rule. And it was just relentless. And it was the saddest part about it. It was some of the people who had been her friends. This was not just a betrayal by political enemies. Many of these people had been her friends, but they thought it politically expedient to take over the country and rule it because they thought they knew better how to do things. So it was very difficult. And yet you hear a song like Aloha Oe, and you hear the elegance and the beauty and the sensitivity and the sentiment of it. And you just know this is more the heart of the Hawaiians. And so no matter how many times others had put them down or what impressions that they might want to put out there, the reality of the Hawaiians comes through in that beautiful music. As I said before, the Queen really transcended all of the difficulties and all of the animosity that was aimed at her. Even towards the end of her life, she still continued to live out her motto of Onipa'a, being steadfast in doing what is right. And there's a beautiful quote from her about how she encouraged her people. And she said, "I could not turn back the time for political change, but there is still time to save our heritage. You must remember never to cease to act because you fear you may fail. The way to lose any earthly kingdom is to be inflexible, intolerant, and prejudicial. Another way is to be too flexible, tolerant of too many wrongs, and without judgment at all. It is a razor's edge. It is the width of a blade of pili grass. To gain the kingdom of heaven is to hear what is not said, to see what cannot be seen, and to know what is unknowable. That is aloha. All things in this world are two. In heaven, there is but one.
Thank you for sharing that. That quote by the Queen has meant a great deal to me in my own study of aloha. Inspired by Queen Lili Uokalani, there was another woman, more contemporary, Auntie Pilahipaki, and she taught a great deal about what the Queen had to say about heaven's perspective and how to view things. And one thing she is well known for is she said to the world in the 1960s, the world will turn to Hawaii as they search for world peace because Hawaii has the key, and that key is aloha. This concept of aloha, similar to Ubuntu, is a very micro process. It is about the individual conduct. And to remember that 1 million or more Hawaiians lived on small islands, isolated for a long, long time, they had to learn to live together. And in that learning, I think aloha evolved as a spiritual condition. I'd like to share the 5 parts of the acronym that Auntie Pilahi created for the word aloha, A-L-O-H-A. A is the first word of aloha, meaning akahai. It means kindness or grace, to be expressed with tenderness. The L is lokahi, meaning unity, unbroken, to be expressed with harmony. O, olu olu, meaning agreeable, gentle, to be expressed with pleasantness. The H, ha'aha'a, meaning humility, to empty yourself and to be expressed with modesty, your humility. And the last day of aloha is ahonui, meaning patience, waiting for the moment, but to be expressed in perseverance. Let's listen to that, sung by the most wonderful Kumuhula, Sharlani Kalama.
Akahai na Hawaii, lokai akulike, olu olu kamanao, ha'ako kulana, ahonui alana kila, aloha
That chant is just so beautiful about aloha, and Sharlani does it so superbly. Queen Lili Uokalani, she transcended the battle, that she applied spiritual attributes, in addition to all of her wonderful qualities and her political astuteness. She applied spiritual attributes to solve the problems in her lives and for her people. Again, knowing that it may take more than one lifetime for the problems to be solved. But if people walked in this way of aloha, that there would always be a Hawaii. And if they lost aloha, which is the inner spirit of this people in this land, then Hawaii would just be another pretty place. It wouldn't have the same effect that it has on the people who live here and who come here.
Don't go away, friends. We'll be right back with more Queen Lili Uokalani and author Gaellen Quinn.
My name is Linda Beal. I live in California. When I want thought-provoking programs to listen to, I pull up Woman Radio. I especially appreciate the fascinating women who are interviewed on Womanocity. Woman Radio is a lively and lovely way to spend my time.
Mosha Vi'i. My name is Kerishi Tendero from Namibia, and you are listening to Womana Radio for well-organized men. I'm listening too.
Gaellen Quinn is in the studio with me today, and we are focusing on the history of Hawaii and why the Queen Lili Uokalani, the last queen of Hawaii, is still so important to Hawaii today.
One of the things that I think exemplifies so beautifully the Queen's ability to transcend is a song she wrote when she was imprisoned in the palace. And here you have a woman who has been besieged, whose people are suffering, and she can do nothing to help them. She herself has been demeaned and imprisoned. And she writes this beautiful song called Ke Aloha o Kahaku, which translates as the Lord's mercy. It was a prayer to God to ask for forgiveness to those businessmen that imprisoned her, that they should be forgiven for their wrongdoings, and that God's mercy is as high as the heavens, and that God hopefully would not look at our sins, but forgive us and cleanse us. She believed deeply in forgiveness as something that had enormous power. So she was really drawing on this beautiful cultural understanding that the only way for healing and to move on in the world was for forgiveness to come first. And not necessarily forgiveness of the acts that people have done, but forgiveness for the individuals. Again, I think in her way of seeing the world, it was very much like Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for years and years. And yet he knew that if he couldn't forgive and he couldn't get over the bitterness of that experience, that even when he was out of jail, he would still be imprisoned and be less effective as a leader and less effective as a person. So this was something that the Queen also understood. And this song has become an ode to the Queen and a symbol of the end of the Hawaiian monarchy.
Let's listen to the prayer written by Hawaii's last queen, Lili uokalani.
O ko aloha no, ai ka lani, a o ko wai o e molele hoi, ko no mi ana.
We are with award-winning author Gaellen Quinn. Her book, The Last Aloha, is a fictional novel that tells the true story of the last queen of Hawaii, Queen Lili uokalani. It's a beautiful book. I encourage you to read it, The Last Aloha. Now it's time for the Womanocity 2-minute, 25-question speed round. Okay, Gaellen, I'm going to ask you questions, and I will give you 2 passes if you can't answer them. But do you think you can handle this in 2 minutes?
I hope so.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you sure? I'm going to throw them at you really fast.
Okay, let's go fast.
What color or flavor is your favorite M&M?
I don't like M&Ms. I don't like chocolate.
What a way to start the question. Oh my gosh. All right. Are you a cat or dog person?
Definitely cat. A dog punctured a hole in my ankle a long time ago, and I'm off dogs. No more dogs.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I think I know the answer to the next question. Would you rather eat chocolate or watch your favorite TV show?
It's got to be TV because I'll eat dark chocolate, but not milk chocolate.
Really? And I love milk chocolate. Okay. What's the one city you've always dreamed of traveling to?
I've always been fortunate to travel all over the world, Asia, Africa, Middle East, all over the place. But I never been to the city of my mother's ancestors, which is Montreal. So I think I'd like to go there.
Okay. Hello, Canada. Canada's beautiful. You'll love it. All right. Are you a morning or night person?
I think I'm a morning person.
Okay. What words do you live by?
I live by that the earth is one country and mankind its citizens. I don't like all of these barriers between people, and I'd like to see them abolished.
I so agree. And if anyone's a world citizen, it's you. Okay. What's one vice you wish you could give up?
Eating while watching television, because that's when I do all the wrong kind of eating.
But it's the best time to eat all the wrong kinds,
That's right, and too much of it.
Okay, what's the best compliment you have ever received?
Wow. Well, I entered a writing contest many years ago before I had written a book. And I got feedback from the reviewer who said, "The writer is gifted." Man, I lived on that compliment for years after.
And it obviously propelled you to keep writing.
Yeah.
Wonderful what one encouragement can do for people. And here now you are this major writer with so many awards. I didn't even tell them all. Okay. How do you start your day, Gaellen?
I always start with prayers and meditation, and sometimes I sing.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think everyone should sing. Even if they can't, you need to express. Sing alone, sing with people, sing where everyone will, where anyone will tolerate you, but sing.
I learned to sing in public in an Irish pub.
Oh my God.
I never sang in public before that, but everybody has to sing when they go to their sing songs. And so I had to get up and sing something, and that got me over my fear of singing in public.
Oh my gosh. What did you sing to the Irish?
I sang Blue Bayou.
Oh, it's a beautiful song too. Linda Ronstadt, yes?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So when are you the most inspired?
When I see people who were estranged coming together and embracing each other, it's like a homecoming, that's the thing that just touches my heart every time.
Okay, let's switch to food, sweet or savory?
50-50.
Ooh, really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay. All right. What makes you smile the most?
Seeing people happy together. I remember this quote by Walt Whitman. He said, "To be surrounded by beautiful, curious, breathing, laughing flesh is enough. I do not ask any more delight."
I never heard that before. That is fantastic. Oh my gosh. What's the one thing people don't know about you?
Probably that Chinese was my minor in college. I spoke Chinese fluently and could read Chinese newspapers.
Well, ni hao and xie xie. That's
Yeah.
all I know.
Ni hao, xie xie.
Yes. Okay. Heels, flats, or sneakers?
Slippers. And if you're not from Hawaii and you don't know what slippers is, they're rubber sandals, and we wear them every day, all the time.
But not inside. We have to take
Not
out
inside.
That's right. No slippers or shoes allowed inside. What's inspiring you in life right now, Gaellen?
I think great writing is inspiring me because I'm trying to write some more things. So whenever I read really great writing, I go, yep, this is something worthwhile doing.
I hope you're working on another novel because people are waiting.
I hope so.
What's the most adventurous thing you've done in your life, Miss Adventurer?
I went and lived in the Amazon for 3 years to help a social economic development project.
In the Amazon forest?
Yeah.
In the jungle?
In the jungle.
With snakes and
With
insects?
snakes and 2 little kids.
And reptiles?
Yeah, all that. Spiders as big as pie pans.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And I bet roaches you could put leashes on.
Yep, exactly.
Oh my Lord, girl, you're too much. All right. How would you define yourself in 3 words?
I'm calm, I'm always striving, and I'm grateful.
Oh, nice. Diamonds or pearls?
I do have my grandmother's pearls, so I guess it would have to be pearls if I'm going to put something on.
Okay. What's something you notice about someone when you first meet them?
I always notice their attitude.
What's the one talent you wish you had?
I wish I could play a musical instrument. I would love to be able to play boogie woogie piano.
Now that surprised me. That I didn't expect. Oh my goodness.
I would love to be able to do that.
Oh, what's your favorite color?
I don't have any favorites.
No.
I just like colors.
Okay, what color clothing do you wear the most?
I wear jewel tones, like sapphire blue, emerald green, ruby red.
Oh, nice. What's the cutest thing on planet Earth?
It's got to be baby animals, all kinds of baby animals.
Do human babies?
Yeah, they count. They count, but actually, little baby animals are actually much more active earlier, so they're more fun to watch often than little tiny babies, because little tiny babies don't do too much. But yeah, they're cute.
Yeah. I'd have to agree with you there. You do make a good point. Okay, Gaellen, what's the best thing that's happened to you this year?
I have to say that it's that my family and I made it through this pandemic so far without getting ill.
Wonderful. Okay, Gaellen, finally, what is your favorite song?
It's called One Voice. It's just beautifully done, and it talks about the mystery and the beauty of unity. And as a Baha'i, that's one of the things that inspires me the most, is that eventually I think humanity will wake up to the understanding we are all one.
I completely agree with you. The song is called One Voice, performed by Emma Zhang, Sarah Zhang, Wei Zhang, and Dennis Bastoff.
This is the sound of one voice, one spirit, one voice, the sound of one who makes a choice. This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of one voice. This is the sound of voices too. The sound of me singing with you, helping each other to make it through. This is the sound of voices too. This is the sound of voices too. This is the sound of voices 3.
Thank you for being with me today on Womanocity for Women with Curiosity, to enjoy great interviews with remarkable women and music from around the world. Broadcasting globally on Woman Radio. Join me, won't you? How much do people know about your business? Woman Radio advertising platform is officially activated. We have 4 advertising options to choose from to let people know about your business. Get in touch with our marketing team by sending an email to adverts@womanr.co.za to know more.